All right, should be warming up here in a second. We got our ovens going.
Yeah.
It's a little bit cold this morning. Everybody okay? Hey.
Thanks.
All right, I was just telling Abby, I'm trying to make videos of everything for the classroom. If you guys want to be able to look at a method again, I'm going to be putting up links on the Google Classroom for YouTube so you guys can watch the videos of what we did in class that day. In case you want to see it again, learn a little bit of something over again. Okay. So today we're going to be learning about the biscuit method. All right, the biscuit method is a method you want to use every time you're trying to get a nice flaky pastry to be made, meaning something that crumbles. We can use this method for things like pie dough. But basically, we're going to make a sweet biscuit known as a scone. So this is one of my favorite recipes of all time. All right. Because it has so much flavor and it uses butter as one of its main ingredients. If you guys look at the ratio of how much butter to flour there is, they're almost even in the amount. Now, in order to accomplish the scone that we want, something that is flaky and light and has a lot of moisture to it, we're going to have to use the biscuit method. Right, is anytime we're trying to make butter flakes into pastry, all right? So the easiest way to do that is by hand in a mixing bowl. If we're going to be doing a very large batch, we'll be using the paddle on like a 60-quart mixer. Right, that paddle's going to break up our butter into our dry ingredients. So the first thing we need to do is weigh all of our dry ingredients and get them into our large bowl. Right, we're going to be starting off with one of the strongest flours in our big shop. We're going to be using a bread flour. When we talked about the roles of ingredients in our classroom, we had really strong flour and really weak flour. Bread was the strongest. What is the weakest flour that we have in our bread shop? Cake. Right, we're using pastry flour. Pastry flour is going to be used anytime we want a really, really tender product. Right, this one, the tenderness is going to come from the butter itself. All right, so we need a very strong flour to be able to hold up all this fat that's going to come into it. If we use a weak flour, it'll come out like a pancake. All right. All right, to this we're going to be adding baking powder. Last time we talked about the ingredients roles, we had a couple of chemical leaveners. We had baking soda and we had baking powder. All right, soda spreads and powder puffs. All right, so since we're trying to make something puffy, light, airy, we want to use baking powder. All right, something that has a lot of air to it, right? So to give it that instant rise, we're going to be using baking powder. So today my last dry ingredient is going to be my salt. I'm only going to be using a ½ an ounce. Good tear. Remember to get that salt out there so you can have a little bit of flavor. This is all of our dry ingredients, right? We're going to have this lightly blended to make sure we don't wind up with any chunks. If we're doing a really large batch, we can run this entire thing through a sifter or a tammy just to make sure we don't have any big bits. I just blend those nicely between two hands to make sure I don't wind up with any salt chunks, rocks, things like that. All right. If you're doing a really big bowl, you can either use a whisk or just get a tammy out and give it a nice blend. You want to make sure everything's really even. Okay? Once this is even, we're going to do a well, all right? Digging a small hole into the center and leaving a space for our liquid ingredients. All right, liquid ingredients, not a lot to it. We're going to be using some orange zest. Orange zest, to answer your question from earlier, Abby, orange zest is the outside of the orange, grated off, and this one is preserved in syrup. It's a big flavoring for our recipe. We're going to use about a ½ an ounce of that, but I just use 1 heaping spoon for this recipe itself. It's a flavoring, so if I use a little bit more or a little bit less, it's not a big deal. All right. So for our orange zest, we're going to be adding that in with our butter. Thank you, Maya. I'm going to try to post this up so it's a little side screen or something right over here. I'm still learning how to use the video editor. All right. So for a pound of butter, we want this to be cold. If it's not cold, right, it's going to make our biscuits really tough. All right. It has to be ice cold because these layers are going to melt when we bake it and no sooner. All right. For our butter itself, we're going to start by cutting this into large pieces. Use a bench knife when you're cutting butter, not a chef knife. Right? Why wouldn't we want to use a chef knife when you're cutting something like butter?
Because it'll slip.
It can slip, man. You're cutting fat. It's slippery. All right. So you want to make sure that we're just going to chunk this up into some manageable pieces. Since we're mixing by hand and not in a mixer, smaller the better. Without really overworking it. It doesn't need to be beautiful. Just cut it into pieces you can manipulate with your hands. All right, I go with probably about gumball size when I'm going into the mixer. All right, those are all going to get blended in with our orange zest. The orange zest is in there because that's going to give us a little bit of incorporation into our flour itself, all right? So to our bowl, all of our dry ingredients, our flavoring, which is our orange zest and our salt, and our fat, all right? We're gonna start just by coating everything that's in my bowl in the dry ingredients, just by picking it up and gently tossing it between my hands. I've got really hot hands. On a hot day, this step takes a little bit less time. On a cold day like this one, it takes a little more time. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna bust up our flour by using our bench knife first. All right, we're gonna do that little rub, all right? First thing we're gonna do, cutting the butter into the bowl just straight down with your bench knife, cutting the butter through the flour. Now butter is not all fat. Butter is about 20% milk or water essentially. So it's gonna have a little bit of moisture to it, the warmer it is. That's why we're using it nice and cold so it doesn't get mixed in and start forming a very special protein. When you get flour wet, it starts to make a protein. What is the name of that protein? Gluten. Right? The more gluten we produce, the tougher something is. And I'm using bread flour after all, so I want to hold off on making gluten in my bowl. Once I've got my butter really nicely chopped up in here, and this is what we're going to be using with the biscuit method every time. It's always going to look like this. Right? It's either going to be on your tabletop using a bench knife, or it's going to be using a paddle in the really big mixer. Right? Once this is about pea-sized pieces, we're going to do this move where we make ribbons of butter between our hands. The way we're going to do that is by taking some of the mixture that we've created, pressing against that mixture with our hands, pressing the butter into some beautiful long ribbons. Those ribbons of butter are going to sit between our layers of flour, and when we bake, they're going to fluff up and make a nice crispy, fluffy pastry. All right. It's a little bit easier to get the feel for it with your hands. When you're doing it in a mixer, you'll notice the flour will start to turn this light yellow color. That's literally the butter starting to rub off on all of the granules of flour. Right? And that's going to do two things. It's going to make it so that if they are covered in fat, they can't bond to one another, so they're going to be really tender. All right? If flour can't touch with liquid, it cannot form gluten and it can't be tough. Right? Making a very nice, tender biscuit. You should start to see some nice big flakes start to form. All right, those flakes need to be intact, meaning don't overmix this. If we go too much, and we mix too much, we're not going to have any layers for our food to go against. Once we're there, let's incorporate our liquids. Our liquids are really high in fat. We're going to be using our heavy cream. Heavy cream is 36% fat, which is going to make our product really tender, fluffy, and moist. This right here, I've got a pint full to the top is 16 ounces, fluid ounces. Anytime we're measuring liquids, we're not going to measure on a scale. We're going to measure by those ounces on the side of the cup, right? We call that fluid ounces. If anyone's taking geometry this year, we're measuring by volume, not weight. 1 pint and a quarter. Quarter pint is up to the 4 ounce mark. I'm putting that right into the center well. Same way when I was adding my orange zest. Make a little hole in the center, put all your liquids directly in the center. All right. I'm also going to be adding some honey, 3 ounces of honey. I'm going to put a little sugar on top as well, but because it's our main sweetener, there's going to be a little bit more of it than what we're used to. So I'm going to look on the side of my measuring cup, and I'm going to fill this up to my 3 ounce line, just on the side here. All right, I like to measure my cream first before my honey because the honey comes out of the cup easier. If I put honey just into a plain cup, normally I'll put a little pan spray or something to make sure that I can get it out of there. We got everything in except our eggs, just 2 eggs going into the bowl. And then we mix, all right? First, on a nice, clean, sanitized surface, we're gonna start in the bowl and we're gonna finish on the table, okay? Starting on the bowl, I'm gonna get into the center, mixing with a nice open hand. I'm gonna blend all my liquids together, my honey, my cream, my eggs, until they make a nice, evenly colored slurry in the center. After we've made that slurry, I'm gonna start grabbing pieces of my dry ingredients and folding my dough, meaning I'm just scooping from the bottom of the bowl up and over again, so that I don't overmix my batter. Rotating the bowl, and just getting this to move so that I can mix it until it loses its powdery finish. Right, it should have all these pieces start to absorb all the liquids. If you're making like a savory biscuit, like for biscuits and gravy, it would be the exact same method. So once we got everything mixed onto the table, we're just gonna be folding this over, pressing it onto itself. If we overmix it at this point, they're not gonna come out very well. So we wanna be really careful about how much we need this dough. Don't overmix it on your table. You're just trying to get everything combined. So all the dry pieces.
Do you like stack it?
Basically what I'm doing is Same way we always need. I'm gonna press down, get what I can, take everything that's kind of dry, fold it in, and just kind of keep that method going until it's fully mixed in. Grabbing any dry spots from my cutting board, or work surface rather.
So this is just, it's not supposed to be like really wet?
Not super wet, no. No, you should be able to come off of it really freely. If it is a little wet, like let's say maybe your hands are warm or your butter got a little warm, you can always dust your surface with a little bit of flour. But we kind of want to try to minimize that because if we add flour, we're going to change the texture of our finished batter. All right, so here we have a nice little scone dough. You should see very large pieces of butter still in this. That's a good sign. That's mean we're going to get nice flaky scones. We're going to get our final weight of our dough to know how to divide this up. So our final weight of the dough, we're just going to do on a scale. Zero out your scale to pounds and ounces. In this case, I've got 5 pounds and 2 ounces. 5 pounds and 2 ounces is going to get divided into 2 pieces. Once we got this, we're going to make them into little rounds, about 10 inches around. Rounding it off with our hands and pressing it down flat. At this point, while you're working it, you might notice it gets a little sticky. We're going to use a little flour on the table to dust this away. Start the final shape. Just a little bit. When we press these into rounds, we're going to give these sugar and a little bit of egg wash to improve browning. And we'll cut them into our final shape. For our egg wash, I've got a mixture of heavy cream and egg yolks. Heavy cream and egg yolks is going to give us maximum browning. So we're just going to brush the entire top with this really nicely.
Yeah.
And to this we're going to add a very special product called sanding sugar. Sanding sugar is a special sugar that when you put it in the oven doesn't really melt, makes a nice crunchy top. We're going to be really generous with the sanding sugar. So to this we're going to cut these into our final shapes, kind of like you cut a pizza. Right? Draw your lines first so you know that they're even. If you see any really small pieces, change your lines. All right? Cut down the middle, and so on until you get these nice, even triangles, trying to line them up as nicely as you can. Always just in half, in half, in half, in half. All right? We're going to get these into the oven at 375 for 20 minutes. You guys can get started. All right, I'll see everybody on the other side.